In the wake of the death of University of Georgia nursing student Laken Riley, top Republicans in state legislature are proposing to rename a bill that would aid the ongoing crisis at the southern border. It would be called Laken's Law. The bill would require local and state law enforcement to notify the feds of the arrest or convictions of non-citizens. It would also repeal an order already on the books the Republicans say is designed to discourage cooperation in the enforcement of federal immigration laws. Of course, Laken is believed to have been killed by an illegal immigrant who already had a criminal record.
One supporter of Laken's Law is Senate Republican leader Rob Ortt. He joins us now to talk more about this. Senator Ortt, thank you so much for coming in this afternoon.
Good to be with you, both of you.
So this renaming was announced last week. Tell us a little bit about what led to this decision.
So we actually introduced the bill 2 weeks prior to Laken Riley's death. And I think it was very poignant. 2 weeks later, she's killed. Her alleged murderer is not only an illegal immigrant, but was here in New York, was arrested for endangerment of a child, and I think theft, and was released. And were this law to be on the books today, I have no doubt that she would be alive today, because he would have been held, an ICE immigration detainer would have been issued, and he would not have been in Georgia. He would have been in New York or in federal custody. But because of laws enacted specifically designed to allow Mr. Ibarra to be back out on the street, Laken Riley is not here today. Now, that is not indicative of all those who are here illegally, but it certainly was the case here.
I'm curious where that puts you on sort of the grand scale of things. We have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, illegal immigrants who are in New York City right now. They have been spread across New York State, just as this is happening in other states as well. This is not specifically unique to New York. This is happening here. We don't have enough information to be able to fully understand the people who are now in our community, right? What can you do, even as the Senate Republican leader, in a situation here where you face such tall odds in Albany? There are people who are coming tens of thousands into the state. We should probably have an idea of who they are.
No question, and that I think is a big issue. Is New York's laws are no doubt a haven, an attraction for those who enter into the country illegally. So they may come into Texas, they may come into New Mexico, they may come into other states, Arizona, but they're going to come to New York. There's a reason why they're coming here, because they know from other people who are here that if you can get here, you're not going to be, the feds will not know you're here. If you're arrested, don't forget, these are people we're talking about. This law would have impact those who are here illegally, who then are arrested or who are arrested so they come into contact with law enforcement because they've committed another crime, whether it be burglary, endangerment of a child, assault, whatever it might be. It would extend misdemeanors back to 365 days. Right now it's 364. Why? Because 365 automatically triggers deportation proceedings. So those kinds of things, I think, would allow law enforcement federally and locally to work better together and know who's here, who's a danger, who's not.
And we're also not talking about, this bill is not intended to say, hey, ICE, go out and round up all the people of color, all the brown people out there. That's not what this bill is intended. This bill is intended to say we need to share information. Why do you think people in the state legislature have such a tough time with that part, just the sharing of information?
I think this really came out, and one of the sponsors of the bill in the Assembly, Jared Gandolfo from Long Island, said it, I think, best. And in the wake of President Trump's election in 2016, with so much of a focus on immigration and illegal immigration and the southern border, a lot of Democrats, especially left-leaning Democrats, they raced to see who could be the most anti-Trump, who could enact the most anti-Trump policies. And these kinds of policies, the policies to provide sanctuary, regardless of whether someone, I mean, just today, the Laken's Law that passed in the House, 170 Democrats voted no. This should not be an overly controversial issue. I would argue most people right now think our law enforcement are working together. Of course, somebody who's a danger, they would be sharing that information with federal authorities, just as we expect federal authorities to share it back. That is not happening, in part because of laws passed here in New York.
Senator, let's talk about another very big topic, the New York State budget. Of course, that deadline is looming. What do you make of everything right now? What are your key issues?
So look, I think the big topic is the spending. I mean, New York State, the last 5 years, the budget has gone up $64 billion. That is larger than 36 other states' total budgets, just the increase. The total budget in New York State is $232 billion. I would tell you that I do not think a $60 billion increase in 5 years is a sustainable trajectory. I think the governor, also feels that way. Now, they agreed the other day that the revenues are going to go up, or they expect them to go up by $1.35 billion. I would say that doesn't mean we have to spend that. Just because the revenues may go up that much, we're at $232 billion. I find it almost impossible to believe we can't find to meet all of the needs of New Yorkers in that 232, especially at a time, and I think it fits in with this, that we're spending $2.3 billion over 2 years, $4.3 billion on the illegal immigrant crisis in New York City alone. So at a time that the governor has proposed cuts to education, has proposed cuts to our infrastructure, we're going to spend over $4 billion in 2 years on the illegal immigrant crisis in New York City. I think that galls a lot of New Yorkers who certainly pay some of the highest taxes in the country. If you live in New York City, you definitely pay some of the highest taxes in the country. And so, I think it's going to be about the spending. I don't know that there's any one thing in there that is on a policy level really controversial. I think it's where are we putting our money? Is it in education, in infrastructure? Is it in law enforcement? Sure. Is it in economic development? Or are we going to spend billions of dollars to give out gift cards and things to people who are non-citizens?
A lot of people have been asking this question, particularly over the past 6 or so months, as more immigrants started arriving in our communities. This is an added burden for our school districts, just because if it would be any additional population coming in. Do you think, from the state legislature, there is enough support to reimburse local schools, or at least schools here in Western New York? Do you think there are schools that are going to get reimbursed for that added burden, that unfunded mandate of additional population?
I think most of our school administrators would tell you that the state legislature, for many years, has never had a problem with unfunded mandates, and so I don't know why this one would be different. The reality was, we were told, and I remember local officials said to the news that nobody, Erie County, Western New York, would not be on the hook for these additional costs. We now know that is not true, and so hopefully having a Western New York governor can maybe help with that. That remains to be seen, but it is certainly my hope that those kinds of things she will understand. Our local school districts can't be on the hook for the New York City really centric policies.
Senator Orr, we are about out of time, but really quickly, just let our viewers know when it comes to the budget, what will these next couple of weeks look like?
They'll be long. We'll be up, all hours of the evening at the end there. I don't expect there to be on time is April 1st. Albany's on time is different than you and I. It'll be timely. I think it'll be done early April, maybe not the 1st. Easter Sunday is March 31st. I don't think we're going to be there on Easter Sunday, but I'm hopeful we'll get an on-time budget. I think New Yorkers expect that, if not a on-time, responsible budget. But I think it'll be on time. We'll see if it's responsible.
Senate Republican leader Rob Orr, we hope to have you back. Thank you so much for being here.
Dave, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very much.
Chief Meteorologist Todd Santos keeping an eye on a fantastic forecast for your Thursday. Todd?
Yeah.